and just so many people, including myself, are all wondering, like, when we got that first round of $1,200, it was helpful. If you're out of work, it's incredibly nice, or incredibly helpful to get a direct payment of $1,200. Like, that's a month's rent. We're kind of thinking at this point, back in April, I think the CARES Act was, that this is not going to last for too much longer. Most people were complying.
I remember talking to you about it then, and we were talking about, when are we going to go back to work?
Right. Yeah. And it was like, well, because at that point, the general consensus was, all you were hearing in the news was like, flatten the curve, flatten the curve. Just quarantine for 2 weeks or a month or whatever it was. I think it was 2 weeks at that point. We're going to flatten the curve, and then we'll still have those guidelines in place, wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart, but everyone will be able to go back to whatever they were doing, right? And it just kind of kept adding to, gradually, 2 weeks passed, and we're just like, okay, guys, like, we're going back to normal life. And they were like, no, good one. Cases are spiking, which we knew they would spike. Like, everyone knew that as soon as everyone went back to their normal, once the 2 weeks were up, people were just going to start to do their thing anyway. We knew cases were going to go up. Like, that's something that everyone knew was going to happen. So when the mass panic hit after 2 weeks, everyone was like, oh my God, cases are going up. But we all knew they were going to go up. And, that's like, if you didn't, then I don't know what you're doing. But like, you knew once people went back, the cases would go up. And so then they were like, okay, we need to quarantine again. Well, okay, so you're going to pay me again, right? No, we're not going to pay you again, but you need to quarantine because we need to get this thing under control. And that's kind of where the huge, not disconnect, but that's where the big point of this video is like, the point of anger for so many people is like, why weren't you either just open everything up so people can make money, as they're already not going to make a lot of money. Restaurants were already going to take a hit, and now you're forcing them to take a hit. So either open up and let them, serve food to go, and at least try to make some sort of living, or pay people to stay at home. But don't do neither, which is exactly what they did. They did neither of them. They and it's just mind blowing to hopefully everyone, like, what the hell is going on here? Any thoughts on that? We haven't even started at the beginning of the timeline. I started in the middle. I started around April. So if you have any thoughts on the CARES Act, Cody?
I think it's really, one of the things that really stands out to me about it is, now that I know more about it and I know how it works and what the obvious effects of it will be, I understand that it was mostly a giant corporate handout. Even something as seemingly defensible as the Paycheck Protection Program through the Small Business Administration, if you look at the recipients of those loans, SBA bragged that over 80% of the loans were legitimately to small businesses, and that makes sense if you count each loan as equal. So if you just look at, okay, well, how many of the loans were for small amounts and how many of them were for large amounts, I think it was something close to that, like 80% or so of the loans were for smaller amounts, like $150,000 or less. But if you look at the total amount of money that was lent out by the SBA, well over half of it was lent out to large national chains, many of whom got the highest loan possible, which was $10 million. And you can go to the SBA's website and download all of it. And it's stuff like, I don't remember all the companies, but it was like Potbelly sandwiches, like large national chains that you wouldn't think would be eligible for a small business loan. I think the most egregious case that I heard of was Tom Brady's small business got somewhere between 900,000 and $1 million in paycheck protection right before he bought a yacht, apparently.
I saw that like today. I was just gonna mention that.
Yeah.
That was a big FU to everyone, but
So yeah, and that's just the PPP. If you look at the direct corporate handout, which was the 500 billion, 47 billion of that, roughly, I might not have that exactly right. It might have been 46. It was in like the low to mid 40s. 40 something billion dollars went directly to corporations. I want to say around 20 billion of that was directly to the airline industry, particularly American Airlines and Delta. But the rest, the remaining, 450 billion or so, was put into a slush fund to be managed by Steve Mnuchin, and basically that money was just supposed to stay there to act as I don't know what the proper term would be, but in fractional reserve banking, you keep a small amount of actual deposits on hand, and then the bank can actually leverage that many times over in the loans that it gives out. And the rule that's set between the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve is that they have to have 10% of the money that the Federal Reserve lends out. So the goal was to have that $450 billion just sit there, basically, as far as I understand it, so that the Federal Reserve could actually lend out $4.5 trillion to Wall Street and large national corporations.
yeah, that's so. I want to fixate on what the large corporations that are getting money, because it's interesting. This kind of brings up the theory that we've been talking about, and it's the supply side economics, which kind of started in the 80s, right? And this is really proof
Sort
that
of. It was older than that, but it had like a revival and a rebranding under
Reagan
Reagan.
really rebranded it as trickle down economics. Everyone's heard the term.
Absolutely.
And in theory, right, there's proving that it doesn't work because of corrupt businesses. And so I'll give you an example. So when you give a business, you give them $10 million. The idea is an ethical business will use that $10 million to provide it to their employees for some way, right? At least in my mind, this is how like an ethical business would do it. Like if I was given $10 million for my business, and I would give 9 million of that in some sort of raise to my employees, some sort of bonus to my employees, some sort of help to help the employees, right? That's not at all what these corporations do. They give what they do is, and this is what airlines were doing for years. This is why they were about to go under when the pandemic started. Is they have no reserve of money at all. What they would do is they would buy back stock in their own company. So if they turned a profit in 2018, they would use that profit, reinvest all the money in the stocks, which isn't doing anything for your infrastructure. It's just making investors and executives more rich and more wealthy. And that's what they would do. So they were focused on their executives and their investors.
Is that because buying back large amounts of stock all at once makes the price jump?
I would assume so. That's a good question. I would need to look that up, but I think stock buybacks are, yeah, I think that's because, so like when you pump back like $10 million back into shares of your own stock, I'm assuming that would make the price go up, which would in turn make someone who had invested in American Airlines more money.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
So I could be talking out of my ass here, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works. But the bottom line is that money wasn't going towards the employees of American Airlines or the infrastructure of American Airlines or even sitting on cash, which some companies do. Some companies just, save up cash for a rainy day or a pandemic, if you will. So Um, so that's why they were going under in the first place. And I can only assume that that's why we see no drop in the S&P 500, no drop in Dow Jones, or the stock market in general is staying relatively, it's still going up. And it's because I can only assume that all this money that they're giving to these corporations are getting pumped back into the stock market. So on
Well,
paper,
it's actually bigger than that. So I had actually a really good quote about that, but I don't know if I can find it.
So the point is that, yeah, while you're looking at that, Cody, the point is that on paper, like these companies, when you see the Dow Jones Industrial Average still increasing, it takes a dip one day, but then it flies back up the next day. I mean, investors don't know what to do. But screw them for a second. But the point is that the people aren't getting the money. The investors and the executives are the ones that are getting all the money, and they're the ones that need the least help. So it's incredible that the point is the trickle down economics should work with ethical and moral business practices. Um, the money that these corporations are receiving should get trickled down to um, the workers, but it just simply doesn't do that. So
the quote that I found that I thought brilliantly hit the nail on the head, and I think one of the big distinctions that is important to me is that there's a difference between classically liberal economic theory and this sort of corporatist Reaganite trickle down theory. The classically liberal economic theory is that the government just shouldn't be involved in the economy. That if corporations are failing, fine, let them fail. They didn't do a good job. Why would you prop up a company that wasn't good at what it was doing? It's this the corruption, I think, really comes in when you have this idea that the government should be handing out money as needed to these corporations to prop them up when they have problems. Because then what you're really doing is, at the same time that you're disingenuously preaching austerity and this more kind of neoclassical perspective on economics to the masses, to your voters, you're actually acting out socialism for the wealthiest people in your country. And I think what's happened, especially because of the policies of the Federal Reserve, where both in 2008 and now, investors know that the Federal Reserve is more than willing to purchase toxic assets to keep the economy from crashing. And not only that, but the Federal Reserve is willing to lend out I haven't found any recent articles about this, but in spring when COVID was first really becoming a big deal in the US, it was reported that the Federal Reserve was lending up to $1 trillion per day to the banking sector for swaps. So throughout the day, the banks make all these transactions, and they need liquidity to help make these transactions go through. And starting in the fall of 2019, they started to have liquidity problems where they were having trouble keeping enough cash on hand to make all these short-term transactions flow smoothly. So the Federal Reserve back in the fall of 2019 started propping up the banking sector with short-term loans. And by short-term, I mean super short-term, like 24-hour loans. By the time that COVID hit the Fed, these short-term loans, there was as much as $1 trillion per day. And slightly longer term loans with 14-day maturities, the Fed was lending out another $1 trillion. So the Fed is so involved in propping up the market, what you have is a no-lose casino for a lot of these large investment firms. And I thought the best quote that I saw about this was from Andrew Brenner, who is the head of international fixed income at Nat Alliance. He was quoted by Reuters as saying, COVID-19 is now inversely related to the markets. The worse that COVID-19 gets, the better the markets do because the Fed will bring in stimulus. That is what has been driving markets. So that's why you see this total disconnect between what most of the country is feeling under COVID and what's happening in the Dow and in NASDAQ and S&P 500, et cetera. You're muted.
Yep, I am. That quote's really interesting because basically what we were talking about is the more money, like when they put it at the top, when they give money to the large corporations, that money is getting reinvested, which is quote driving the economy. But it's driving the upper class economy, sure, yeah, but it's not driving anything for the lower class.
Which gets into that thing that we were talking about, the progressive inflation that they were talking about at Zero Hedge.
That's exactly what I was getting at. Yeah, because the cost of a gallon of milk is still the same. But if you look, I saw a home on Lake Tahoe for $40 million the other day, and it's excessive. I mean, if you look at it's trickling down to the middle class. You can see home prices skyrocket. But if you look at these luxury homes, besides just being tax havens for rich people, I'm detracting from the point here way too far. But these homes are like inflate. Like, do people? I don't think people buy these homes. I mean, I don't know. But if you look at the prices of like jets and yachts and luxury homes, they call them, the prices of these things are hugely inflated. And when that sector collapses, it's going to collapse onto the middle class, and the upper class is just going to take their money and run, as people would say. I mean, it's all going to collapse, but it's going to collapse on the people that have been propping them up this whole time, is what is going to happen.
It all makes me think of pre-revolution era France, when you had people starving in the streets and you had all of the aristocrats literally living in their own personal city in Versailles with the king. Totally removed from this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that is what's happening. Like if you not to say that.
Does that make Pelosi Marie Antoinette?
Yeah. Wait, what about it?
Does that make Pelosi our Marie Antoinette?
Sure. Yeah. In a way, yeah. I mean, she gives off that vibe, right? But if you take a good look around you, like that is exactly what is happening. I mean, these rich people are living in their own little world, and with very little consequences right now. But when that upper class inflation bursts, it's all gonna just screw up everything. I mean, it's your gallon of milk is $2 now, but then I don't know. I'm not sure what'll happen when that bursts, but it's prime for a revolution, is what it is. I mean, look at what happened in the French did it in your analogy, or it is very reminiscent of the French Revolution.
I don't know if the inflation bubble will really burst for the country's wealthiest people, because I don't know. That's not the inflation that's happening at the higher echelons of society. It's not affecting them because they have shitloads of money. The guy at Zero Hedge, he said, the money that they're getting from stimulus is just getting thrown onto the shit pile of money that they already had. It doesn't matter if the price of a yacht goes up 40%. I think what will happen is I haven't fully developed this thought, but real estate's really interesting because you said it's trickling down to the middle class in real estate. I think I know you didn't mean it this way, but the phrase trickle down usually has this implication that The money itself is trickling down to the middle class. So the price of housing is going up because the middle class has more money to buy housing. But everyone that I've talked to in real estate, that's not what's happening. It's that
That's not
a
what I meant.
bunch of rich motherfuckers took their money out of the stock market when COVID first hit, and they started dumping it up into real estate. So what I think is um, more likely than like the inflation bubble and the upper classes of society like popping and that imploding everything. I think what's happening is I think middle class people are going to be priced out of uh, the marketplace and certain sectors, real estate in particular, and it's going to be even harder to climb the economic ladder. There's going to be an even greater um, schism between the lower class and middle class on one side and the wealthy elite on the other side, especially when the eviction moratoriums expire and the foreclosure moratoriums expire, and if there are more lockdown measures. Because if we have a wave of if we have another wave of rising unemployment, that's going to hit the rental market. A lot of people are going to struggle to collect rent for their properties, and large, some of these rental companies are huge multi-million or multi-billion-dollar rental companies. I think the CEO of BlackRock, and I think BlackRock has like $7 trillion under management. So they're an enormous company. And the CEO of BlackRock was recently, the Daily Post did an article about how he was bragging about how good their real estate profits have been under COVID because they've been able to charge more rent, higher rent, or something like that. So the large national corporations, if there's massive rent strikes or massive evictions because unemployment's skyrocketing, what that's going to do is all the small timers, all the middle class people who listened to Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and went to the Fortune Builder seminars in Las Vegas, those people are going to be wiped out. And there's going to be all of this inventory flooding the market, and all the rich motherfuckers who already have mountains of cash and tons of real estate properties are going to buy those up. And
Yep.
I don't remember where I was going with this, but I think that that's a more like that general outcome that I was trying to describe. I think that's probably what's going to happen. And I think that you're going to see this continual sliding where there's this huge disconnect from what the lower echelons of society are experiencing and what the upper classes are experiencing, which is
Yeah,
also what you saw in France pre-revolution.
for sure. Yeah, I mean it's what you're talking about is class
Class
spread.
of the ass.
Yeah, you're just going to keep seeing a larger and larger gap between rich people and poor people, and the middle class are going to get pushed down into the poor people is what's happening. And the people who are, that's an interesting point.
They'll pick themselves up by their bootstraps. It's the American way.
But it's going to be even harder because to get to that level of wealthy, to get to that upper class level, you have to make, instead of being a millionaire, you have to be a 10 millionaire or a 100 millionaire to be able to gain that upper class status now. So it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out.
The startup capital necessary to build real wealth is going to increase as well. It's going to be harder to even get any skin in the game so that you can start building any sort of financial independence.
Yeah, for sure.
Necessary to climb the economic ladder.
Yeah.